Welcome back, business management students. In the previous session, when we were looking in chapter 15, purchasing and supply management, we last looked at the steps of the purchasing and supply cycle, or the steps in the purchasing and supply process, which we said it starts with the development and description of a need, then the choice of suppliers, followed by research on prices and availability. Then they will issue the order and conclude the contract. Will also have follow-ups and speeding up of the process. Then they receive the receipts, inspect what they have received, and distribute to different or various functions in an organization. Then the handling of errors and discrepancies to see if they have received what they actually ordered. If there are differences, then those will also ought to be corrected. The order ought to be paid for, and the last stage will then be the closing of the order. So this is a 9-step process, and you will find it also explained in detail even in your textbook. So we are moving on with this chapter to look at quality decisions as a purchasing and supply activity. So it's also the responsibility of the purchasing and supply function to ensure that the materials or the products or the services that are sourced for the organization meet the quality expectations of the organization. So there are technical considerations that ought to be taken note of. Sometimes these come from engineers and also designers in the organization. Then there are also commercial considerations, which normally come from end users or from the marketing function. End users, we mean the function or the department in the organization that will then use the resources or the materials that we have been ordered. Description of the quality or description of quality, how quality can be described. It can be described from an operations perspective, where we look at specifications. So these specifications is generally the general method of describing quality, where you look at certain specifications that you can set for yourself or that individual functions in the organization can actually set. There is also standardization. It can also be used to describe quality. Then there are other grades or other market grades, brands that can be considered to be of quality. Then we also take note of the South African Bureau of Standards, then also the engineering drawings and samples. To control quality, as we said in the process, there is need for inspection to actually see on whether what you ordered is what you received, and does it meet the specifications that were given. Are they of the same brand that was ordered? So during inspection, samples of delivered materials or services are subjected to tests by quality controllers to actually see if what was supplied to them as an organization meets the quality specifications or meets the quality expectations of the organization. Then there's also, you can actually receive a certificate agreement from the supplier. Then there are also international standards that you can also look for. Like if you are ordering materials, also try to see or to realize on whether they are actually certified internationally to provide such products, or are they certified nationally to provide such products. So there are international standards. There are also those standards that are set by the South African Bureau of Standards. So this is important, especially when you are buying materials that you then use to produce other products in your organization. They ought to meet certain international standards or certain national standards, so that when you use them, you will not produce products that are of substandard, which will end up giving you problems with your customers. Part of also of the purchasing process activities, or purchasing process and activities, part of the activities that the purchasing and supply function do include holding stock, controlling the inventory and holding inventory. So they ought to decide on purchasing and supply quantities. How much of a certain product should they buy, and also when should they buy it. So in this case, normally the argument is, should we even hold inventory in an organization? Because the belief is that if we hold inventory, we may be keeping a lot of our financial resources being held in the form of that particular asset, inventory, which we know from financial management that it is difficult to sell. It is difficult to sell stock. So even in financial statements, you realize that there is opening stock, and even at the end of the period, there is also closing stock. Even when we calculated the asset test ratio, you realize that on current assets, we had to deduct stock or inventory. Reason being, it is not always easy to liquidate inventory. So there are other people who hold the view that we ought not to hold inventory in an organization, whilst there is also another view that inventory ought to be held in an organization. So to determine the levels of inventory that ought to be held, we must be able to answer on why should organizations hold stock. Is there a need for inventory holding in an organization? And on that one, we learn that if we hold inventory in an organization, it helps to ensure that operations processes continue without being interrupted or without disruptions. It also allows businesses to utilize cost saving through longer production runs and volume discounts. If you buy in large quantities, you also enjoy discounts. If you have stock in your organization and you start production processes, you can keep them running for a longer time and produce more. So that will also allow you to enjoy economies of scale if you think of it from an operations perspective. However, on another note, inventory comes with costs. There are inventory carrying costs, inventory ordering costs, and also those two, they make total inventory costs. Generally, there are costs that are involved if you are to order inventory, if you are to acquire inventory, if you are to acquire materials from other organizations, you need to, there are administrative costs, you also need to transport them. Then if you have inventory in your organization, definitely you will need space to keep that particular inventory or stock or materials, whatever you may want to refer to them as. You will also need security. You will also need lighting. Some of the inventory may also go obsolete. It may actually lose value whilst you are holding it. So you ought to decide on the quantities of inventory that you hold as an organization. As I said, some organizations opt not to hold stock at all, while others opt to hold optimal levels of stock. There are different inventory control systems that organizations can think of, especially in terms of managing stock. So part of those inventory control systems, the most common ones, include the system of fixed ordering quantities or fixed order quantities. And in this system, what happens is after a certain period of time, the organization knows that they will order a certain quantity of materials. Then there's also cyclical ordering system. In this case also, an organization makes orders when inventory levels reach a certain level. So it's different from fixed order quantities, because with fixed order quantities, it's about time. They consider time, but with cyclical ordering system, they consider inventory levels in the organization. Then we have materials requirements planning system, which is basically referred to as the MRP. And with this system, there is need for planning so that you really know how much materials you need, at what stage, how those materials will be bought, and so you actually plan for materials that will be required in the organization in time. Then we also have the just-in-time technique, or the just-in-time system, which is a Japanese practice where they believe that you ought not to hold stock in the organization. So you only acquire stock when there is a requisition and when there is a customer who needs that product, because it is costly to keep stock in the organization. However, with the just-in-time technique, you need to know that your systems ought to be very efficient so that you will not keep the customers waiting. Also, from an operations perspective, remember, customers do not want to wait for a longer time. They have that need of shorter lead time. So you can't practice just the just-in-time technique if it will take you a longer time to just acquire materials to produce a certain product. So with the just-in-time technique also, you don't keep stock of inventory, you don't keep stock of inputs, you don't keep stock of work in progress, you also do not keep stock of the finished product. That is done so as to save and cut costs. Then there is also the quick response and automated replenishment systems. With this one also, there is now use of automated systems to ensure that once inventory levels reach a certain level, the purchasing and supply unit is quickly informed. Then they make the purchases in right quantities and at the right time. Then there's also efficient consumer response system. So all these are inventory control systems that can be followed or that can be used by purchasing and supply managers. The selection and management of suppliers. This is an important process. It's an important activity which involves the selection of suppliers who will be supplying us and from who we will be buying or purchasing. So it's important for you, it's important for everyone, or it's important also for purchasing and supply managers to know that there is need to ensure that there is need to select the right suppliers. So this process generally explains how suppliers are chosen, how the suppliers are chosen. So this particular slide basically explains that particular process. But what is important at the end of the day is to choose the right supplier who will not disappoint the organization, who will not disadvantage the organization. In terms of the management of suppliers, we should also look at how organizations can create long-term relationships with suppliers. And there's also need to develop the suppliers. In some cases, especially for large organizations, if they depend on small businesses or small organizations, they may actually need to help develop those suppliers. The issues of black economic empowerment that can be enforced through purchasing, and most organizations nowadays, they want to buy from those that have high black economic empowerment scores, so that they also benefit and they will be seen as contributing to the common good of other organizations. Also, another important activity of the purchasing and supply function is that of price decisions or price determination, where they ought to decide on which prices they should accept and which prices they should not accept. So there are different ways in which that can be done. They can make use requests for quotations or ask other organizations to submit bids or tenders, as we refer to them. They can also work with published price lists or catalogs or brochures from other organizations. So it just depends on what needs to be purchased and on the nature of the transaction that needs to be completed. Also, when to buy is another activity. The aims of buying at the right time are to ensure that the business is supplied on an ongoing basis. Also reduces the risk of price fluctuations and helps to keep inventory at an optimal level. At optimal level, we mean you are not holding too much stock. You are also not holding too little stock. Because too much stock has disadvantages, too little stock has disadvantages. So it's advisable to hold optimal level of stock. That is, if you do not believe in the just-in-time technique. Then there are factors that influence scheduling of purchases. That is, when will purchases be made. These factors can both be internal and also external. Thus, they can be from within the organization based on the weaknesses and strengths of the organization itself, or they can actually be as a result of factors that the organization cannot control. So basically, this is it about the purchasing and supply function. I urge you to study this chapter and also to complete the case study that was provided for you to complete in the main group for BEC 121. Thank you so much. Let us engage in our group on Blackboard so that we can answer the questions that each of us may be having. Thank you.